Fantastic. Am I sharing okay?
Yeah.
And everybody can see
Yeah.
me and hear me okay. That's great. So hopefully a little bit interactive, but given there's nearly 40 people on the call, we'll need to manage that accordingly. But there will be a few questions for the audience. But I'm really delighted to be here. I think everything that's been said in the introduction by Tamsin and Nikki is right on the money in terms of the biggest opportunity, and on the other side, the biggest threat to the sector in terms of taking advantage of the people side of the asset system. So what I'm going to talk to you about is, if you like, my philosophy for collaborative asset performance, and test that with you. I'd love to get your feedback. And I have been dipping into the Innovation Festival, which is quite incredible actually. It's almost overwhelming, the amount of stuff that's going on there. So that's brilliant. It's all about testing how we work together. So I'm going to start with a question for you. As you see this statement, if you complete this statement in your heads and maybe put your response in the chat, our greatest assets are our what? Chris, have we got anything coming through? I can't see the chat, so if you could let me know.
Overwhelmingly people.
Right, okay. That is, of course, incorrect. It's our anaerobic digesters. Our entire focus of asset management as we know it has been on the physical asset system in my 30 years of experience in the water sector. And really what I'm going to talk to you about is effectively my concept, and that I think is really borne out by what's been said already, that really the asset system, the physical asset system, has to work hand in glove with the people, behavioural, cultural asset system. But what does that look like? Because there's so much opportunity in that space, in my opinion. And I think, I'm not sure who came up with the idea of the playing to the music theme right through the sprint, but I've sort of taken that and run with it. So it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. Okay, firstly, what was the year of that song? See what's coming through, Chris? Any guesses? I can't hear you.
Around 83 or 84, I think.
83, 84, 82. That scared me. I think Bananarama are involved with that there. I think there's a Bananarama group today. So
I was going to say, Ben, you can't have been born then.
I know, he looks so young, doesn't he?
I certainly was, Tamsin.
Or it's just the sort of great moisturiser or something. I'm particularly loving the soft focus and tunes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. We can focus on Ben for a bit later on again.
No, sorry.
We'll come back. So, as we move to 2020, I think the song title's not far off. And I would argue that we know what to do, but we actually need to change how we do it. And actually, we need to do that fast. So, back in, I think it was 2017, the guidance for PR 19 came out from Ofwat. And at that point, I wrote an article jointly with Tony Conway, formerly of United Utilities. And we argued that the biggest opportunity and risk to the water sector was not taking account of the behavioural aspects in the system. So if you think about the journey many of us have been on for many years now, back in the day, you could drive efficiency out of scope. You could play clever games to the regulator on the financial aspects, on weighted cost of capital and things like that. You could squeeze the unit costs of concrete, engineers, etc. Processes and systems come and go. You're always investing in a new system, even as the old systems lie around and cause you a lot of pain and cost. Technical innovation in the asset base in the sector, we have to admit, is pretty slow. And that's in things like new treatment processes and the like. I see right across the patch, if it's not invented in a particular area, it's very slow to be adopted. And then what we've seen is a dramatic rise over the past 5-10 years in use of analytics, information technology, and how we operate using IT. And this conference clearly is a case in point. So really what you've seen is an evolution of, we've done a lot of the squeezing of what to do. We need to really focus on how we do it. And that's a really important shift. And the companies that you see disrupting their markets globally are the ones that don't necessarily shift what they do. Like Amazon still sells stuff, but they transform how they do it. And that's a combination of people, behaviors, as well as logistics and technology. So we coined the term back then, behavioral innovation. I think that's still relevant, but really I'm pushing it like collaborative asset performance. So let's explore the change journey a little bit more on the back of that. And whoever said that the world is accelerating and changing fast, I think I totally agree. And I've been using this graph for probably 15 years. And everybody always says that's how change feels. And then when you ask them, how does it feel? Oh, sorry. I should have turned that silent. If you ask them how they feel about the ability to respond to the change, they say, well, we are moving, but not fast enough. So there's a gap opening up and continuing to open up. But of course, what's happened over the last 6-8 months is COVID has absolutely fundamentally caused a shock to the system and accelerated a lot of change in a way that we've collectively had to deal with, but also in a very reactive way. And that's had a pretty significant negative impact in many areas. I think we're lucky to work in a sector that is a core essential service, because many sectors have almost been driven to extinction through this process, as you know. So how do we get back on track and start to close the gap? Because there is a massive gap, and that is the opportunity for progressive companies to close that gap faster than their competitors, but also the risk if you don't close that gap. And it's characterized. You can see the shift that we're going through in the market and in the world. So the parallels and the mirror images associated with these graphs is quite frightening. As you look at the COVID-19 cases right across the year, and then you look and see how that massive rise corresponds with a massive adjustment in markets, and BA being a case in point of a service that suddenly isn't quite as essential as it thought it was. And then you look at the opposite, some company like Zoom that is positioned to take advantage of that. So all our immediate attention really is pushing through this challenge globally, and yet in the background we still have an ongoing set of challenges to deal with, driven by this, for example. Can anybody tell me what this is representing?
Climate change.
Yeah, spot on, Ben. So average global temperature right across the last 100 years or so. So this is just quietly, relentlessly moving in the background. And I know that a lot of focus of the water sector is to ensure that we don't lose sight of this agenda as we go through the current turbulence, because we can't. So the times they are changing. I told you there'd be lots of references to here. Couldn't resist it. And actually, when you look at the lyrics of this song, it's quite good for the water sector, though it does predict extreme events rather than scarcity. Admit that the waters around you have grown, and that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. So I think that is a challenge to the sector, as well as to the country on lots of fronts. But okay, so quick one again. What was the year of that song? Any guesses?
Was 67 up here?
67.
68.
64. Anybody remember that one? Anybody want to remember it? Like, I'll move on. Okay, right. As I told you, I couldn't resist. So we've got a leadership choice for the water sector, and a real challenge right down through the sector on this. So I've laid out a couple of different paths: the road to hell, and 3 steps to collaborative asset performance heaven, which was the re-release of this song. So again, just quick one: road to hell, what year? I'll keep going. 89. Answer in your head. 3 steps to heaven. Any guesses, Chris, coming through?
63.
63. 60. Earlier than that.
60. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about the 3 steps on the road to hell. And I'm sure you'll recognize these. So I need to move this around as we go here. Oops, sorry, go back. Right, first one, FOPO. Fear of people's opinions. Second one, chasing certainty. Third one, trying to change people's behaviors. So let's talk about these. Fear of people's opinions is probably the biggest fear that's causing anxiety, stress, depression right across the world, particularly with teenagers at the moment, which has been accelerated by social media. It is the primary risk that your brain is responding to in the environment, given that the things that really used to threaten us as our brains were evolving, like saber-toothed tigers and people with spears in the jungle, were that they just don't exist anymore. fear of people's opinions is effectively managing personal risk, and we have different perspectives on personal risk. Again, it was mentioned earlier about how do you create an environment where it's safe to take risks, because you have to be able to take risks if you want to innovate, and the perception of risk has to be reduced for people to be comfortable to take the risk. So what is the perception of risk for the organization and for individuals? And not just physical, clearly, but psychological. And we could talk a lot about that, but we have to reduce the perception of risk. And I heard Rachel Fletcher of Ofwat say that her primary concern about the water sector generally was its risk aversion, and that's a systemic issue. Certainty is no longer, and probably never was, real, and it's certainly in short supply now. It's no longer affordable to have certainty of asset compliance, the quality standards that we'd all love to meet of the actual asset itself, plus the cost that's affordable. So certainty is sold out, and this again plays to the concept of how we understand and manage risk. And COVID is a great example of that at the moment, because the COVID risk is front and center in our minds, but I'm sure nobody can really, with a clear mind, compare the risk of getting COVID and the implications of that to the risk of crossing the road. And so getting a clarity of risk is key. Changing people's behaviours, seeking to change people's behaviours, unless you want to go one-to-one as a psychiatrist or psychologist, this is not the space that we need to operate in. So just issuing instructions to the pets, to the kids, to the employees as to how to behave differently, generally, in my opinion, doesn't work. So when you share, please do this, please do that, you don't really get a response that you would like in terms of the behaviour that you'd want. And what is really behind this is that context matters, consequences matter, and the environment matters. And I think Tamsin, you mentioned about what it feels like to be in a high performing environment. So how do you create that context? The child, if she's tired and hungry, that's massive context. Consequences matter. If the dog gets a treat and links that to the behavior of sitting down, then you're going to get more like the behavior you want. So ultimately, what's primarily our opportunity is to make changes in the environment. So we have had a massive shift in our environment, and our behavior has changed as a reaction to that. And behavior is contingent in many ways on the environment, and that is controllable by the leadership. So it's the physical, and it used to be the physical, it's now really the virtual space you're operating in. And what has almost the biggest influence is the behavior of other people in that space, particularly the leaders. So as soon as the leaders do anything that is out of kilter with what their stated goals are, they don't realize just how visible that is, and that kills the momentum for any change that they'd like to make. But you can make changes in the environment. And I was working with another utility company on their collaboration strategy as they moved into AMP7 from AMP6. They'd got pretty transactional in AMP6, and one of the guys in the team just said, it's our choice. These next years can be heaven or hell. It's a leadership decision as to how we manage the environment. We're not changing the contract. We're not changing the scope. This is a leadership decision. So again, I couldn't resist the Black Sabbath reference. Heaven and Hell album. Any guesses on the year? You must know this one, Ben.
80, 73.
80. Oh,
78.
Spot on, whoever said that. So, 3 steps to collaborative heaven. This is an attempt to boil a lot of behavioural science into what has really impacted me as an engineer, looking at challenges that I've faced and what's worked and what hasn't worked. So firstly, drive the performance equation. Secondly, remove the obstacles. Thirdly, harness the power of steam. So let's work through these. So the performance equation, and really this was articulated by both Nikki and Tamsin earlier on. It's very simple. The performance is a combination of the capability of the system plus the environment that the system is operating in. So if we think about that from a physical asset perspective, a pump works in the context of a wider system in a pumping station, and then as part of a wider network, and clearly then as part of the wider asset base providing water to the whole of a region. So in that environment, the capability really of the pump itself is its specification, the quality of its manufacture, etc. The environment that it's in is to do with the location. If it's in a saline environment or an unsecured environment, its performance is ultimately going to be different to whether it's been well looked after, maintained, it's got the right power supply, etc. Capability plus environment. So then that translates to the people system. Individual graduate engineers coming out with massive potential, then working in teams, and of course then working in wider enterprises to drive performance and the benefits we need to achieve for our customers. It's completely analogous. So you've got a core capability, degree, training, mentoring, etc., that builds the capability of the individual and of making up the team. But the environment is massive, the workplace conditions, and this is not HR, this is not terms and conditions, which some people sometimes think this means. This is it a safe environment? And who was it said that can you bring ideas, can you bring concerns forward? And that's massively influenced by the behaviors of others in the same workplace. Again, particularly the leaders. And this is a scalable concept. So look right across any utility company, any asset-based organization. And I would argue actually nationally, it's about the combination of the asset base plus the environment. So the rationale behind many industry-wide national maneuvers like Project 13 is about creating a better environment for the country to operate in so that its performance can increase. Without the effective infrastructure, water, wastewater, broadband, transport, etc., the country can't operate as effectively as it needs to. So it's the performance equation scales. So if we think a bit more about what we mean by performance, so I couldn't resist this one as well. I want to ride my bicycle. If we compare this photograph of a penny farthing race to this photograph of a high stakes Olympic event, the interesting thing is that the human system has not changed at all. People have not evolved over the 100 years or so. It's the environment that's changed, the technology that wraps around the human asset, the nutrition, the training regime, the facilities, etc., 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 the mindset. All of that creates an environment for high performance. And the guy in the back of the bike in white is Neil Facci, who I know well. He's a Paralympic cyclist, so he embodies that combination of personal capability and the environment to drive success and multiple gold medals. If anybody goes to look for the album cover for the Queen song, I Want to Ride My Bicycle, you'll see why I didn't put that on the screen. It's a bit non-PC, you wouldn't get away with it now. But what was the year?
Got a 76.
76, 78, pretty close.
Okay.
Now, the really interesting thing about this analogy is that the metric for success is crystal clear. Does it make the bike go faster? Any change in that system, whether it's in the head and mental mindset of the cyclist, or the lycra that's on the bike, or the oil they use to oil the cogs, etc., does it make the bike go faster? And it's a really clear metric of success. And I think often in our sector, the metric of success is not clear, and potentially it's conflicting between different parts of the system. So the second thing, which links to that, is removing obstacles. So again, Tear Down the Wall, Pink Floyd, couldn't resist it. What year?
79, 80.
79, yeah, spot on. Yeah, we're getting better at this. Great. Removing obstacles, you get massive response to, because leaders, and I've been guilty of this many times, their default is to add stuff to the environment, a new initiative, a new organizational change, a new system, a new set of leaders below them. We add to the system. We don't do a lot to take stuff away from the system and to ensure success. So a great equation here which links behavior to engineering in my mind is that the probability of success plus the probability of failure in any sort of closed system is 100%. So by default, if you increase the probability of success, you're reducing the probability of failure, and vice versa. So if you remove obstacles that could cause you to fail, you're then increasing your chance of success. So if you're always looking for the biggest obstacles that get in the way of any behavioral change, then you're making real progress if you remove them as a leader. What's quite interesting about this is that success relies on and logic. So to put a man on the moon, you need to do A and B and C and a million other things right for that mission to be successful. But failure is or logic. So a catastrophic event can be caused by X or Y or Z. So it's really valuable to focus on removing obstacles. And the step 3 is really applying what I've called STEAM, which is an acronym that summarizes what I think are the most significant nudge-based, behavioral science-based, if you like, tools of influence that are working on us all the time, but are there at our disposal for working on our people and asset system. So STEAM, yeah, again, couldn't resist the Peter Gabriel link. Ben, you'll know this one. What year?
I don't, Gary.
You don't? Okay.
He's getting help from the floor.
Oh, right, okay. 92. Right, so,
87.
yeah. So 5 tools of influence. I'll just race them really quickly. Collaboration powered by STEAM. Social. Make it social. The power of social pressure is incredibly strong. People follow what other people are doing. Again, particularly the people in their environment and the leaders in their environment. And that drives everything associated with brand, marketing, etc. So creating the demand is about creating a social pressure, a positive engagement around a brand. It's hugely behind everything that draws all of us, particularly our teenage children, into the social media world. It's massively reinforcing and allows them to become the product for all the advertising that the companies are actually selling. Social pressure clearly is in play in the moment in the COVID world that we're working on, and it's it can be a very positive as well as a very negative tool. Second one, make it timely. You'll know that when you get it wrong in terms of the timing of a critical conversation, you're not going to get the outcome you want. But timing of any intervention is critical to success. And the one that interests me is all around the COVID dynamics. And so my parents were actually trapped's the wrong word, stuck in New Zealand with my sister in Christchurch right through lockdown because they couldn't get back. Probably a good place to be locked down. But what was clear was how well New Zealand managed the situation, and they had real clarity around their levels and what it would take to trigger those levels in terms of timing. And then they had that in place, and then they escalated through from level 2 to level 4 over those dates. So it was about clarity, not just what, but when the most critical steps would have most impact. The E in STEAM is probably the most powerful one. Make it easy. So how often is it really, really, really difficult for people to do what you want them to do? There's reams of contradictory procedures, etc. You all know the complexity that we tend to create. The easier you can make things, the better. And the gold standard of making it easy is that if people don't do anything, you get the result you want. So who remembers when the cash machines used to swallow your cards, and then you probably haven't had your cards swallowed for quite some time, and that is because the technology, they just changed the default. So now when you withdraw your money, the card pops out first. You won't get your money without taking your card. It used to be the other way around. You take your money, which is what you came for, forget your card. And that simple switch of the default had massive implications. And it's a really powerful message, because the easiest thing for most people to do is to do nothing. Digital rehearsal, I think, is a great example of making it easier for people bringing the operation staff and whoever all stakeholders into a project. It's about making it easier to visualize, easier to understand, easier to make decisions. Brilliant. The A in STEAM is make it attractive. And this, apologies for this one, but it is a water sector related example. And it is a seminal nudge story of the urinals in the men's lavatories at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, whereby introducing a very simple nudge, they were able to make a significant quantifiable reduction in the amount of cleaning required in the system. And I'll leave it up to everybody's imagination as to how that nudge worked. But making it attractive, which means make it interesting. Attractive could be positive or negative, as in it's shocking, disgusting, things that capture attention. You're not going to get change without capturing people's attention. This was a great example, actually. And if you've got anybody's got a QR code reader on their phone, if you scan that really quickly. So this was a company that I know well, architecture companies, trying to work out how do they differentiate themselves. Now we've all gone virtual. This was back in about April, and trying to do pitches virtually. How do they set themselves apart? So if that works, what you'll see is that they could put that on the screen in their Zoom presentation, and then suddenly all of their clients are looking at a 3D model. Can you see it, Nikki? Yeah, I can see you looking around. Yeah, so it's it's just making an impression. It's the same thing they would have shown them in a physical meeting, but suddenly makes it attractive, captures attention. They won that job.
That's brilliant.
Does it work?
Yeah.
So simple,
Brilliant.
like they did the technology. Yeah. And then the final one, really, really powerful as well. It's hugely focused on the messenger. And you don't need to tell parents that, when their teachers will tell them to do something and they'll quietly do it. If the parents tell them, no chance. It's just, the messenger is so powerful in terms of, so who's the right messenger for the change you're trying to drive? And quite often it's not the CEO, because the people on the ground, particularly on site, for example, are going to respond to, what does the crusty site supervisor do? He's the guy who's more social influence over me than the CEO sitting in the remote ivory tower somewhere that I've never even been. And you think about the messages or the messengers for the agenda, these climate change, plastics, etc. You're following the credibility and power of these people, and that adds and catalyzes the message. This one I love, which is a messenger-based nudge. It's just really powerful. So the messenger is the child of the worker, and it does capture your attention, because that's what you can't drive change without capturing attention. So those three high-level things, there's a lot behind that clearly, and it's not easy to make this work, but it's a start to thinking about changes you might want to make. But you do need to have real crystal clarity of what you're trying to change and why. And that does challenge us to have an open mind. I do love this quote from Frank Zappa, but we all need to have an open mind and a learning mind. And I think the final thing that I would leave you with is the question I love to ask around changes in behavior and changes in how you would run a system is sort of encapsulated by the Carlsberg question. And so this might fly for a number of you on the call, but who will remember the Carlsberg adverts, which are probably from the 90s, maybe into the 2000s. And they just had a string of adverts of if Carlsberg did ... lots of things. And they just painted this amazing picture of, you should just go and Google them on YouTube. And when you watch each of those, it's a combination of the core service plus an amazing experience. And what I like about this is that Heineken picked up on that and said, well, if Carlsberg did beer, it would be Heineken. But so if you go and ask, if you're identifying like an area like operational handover, nightmare in lots of companies, what would that look like if Carlsberg did it? It's a great way to start a conversation, and it's a great way for me to finish mine. So that's what I've got for you today.